Louis Studs Terkel, a Nobel-winning author, lived through the Great Depression. He was 17 when people started getting evicted, selling their belongings, and moving into shacks on the street. In his book Hard Times, An Oral History of the Great Depression, he interviews survivors who talk about the strangeness of seeing 1/4 of all Americans suddenly jobless and hopeless. An estimated 2 million Americans moved into Hoovervilles or became drifters or squatted in vacant buildings. That was one of the oddities of the Depression. If you lived in the city, there was plenty to eat, plenty of clothes to keep you warm, and plenty of places to sleep. They were just off limits if you couldn't pay. Here's an account by Virginia Durr. She talked about companies wasting products because nobody had money. Have you ever seen a child with rickets, shaking with palsy, no proteins, no milk, and the company's pouring milk into gutters? People with nothing to wear, and they were plowing up cotton. People with nothing to eat, and yet they killed the pigs. If that wasn't the craziest system in the world, could you imagine anything more idiotic? This was just insane. If you're sitting in traffic and you look to your right and you look to your left and imagine 1 in every 4 cars suddenly bursting into flames, would you blame the drivers? Would you assume 1/4 of all people forgot to change their oil for 100,000 miles? Or would you assume it was a manufacturing issue? What about the Great Depression? Was it a people problem or a problem with the system? We know from economists that the Great Depression was sparked by weak regulation over Wall Street investors, poor responses by the Federal Reserve, and a fix-it-yourselves attitude by the President Herbert Hoover, who claimed that rugged individualism would save the economy, not handouts. He and his officials shifted the responsibility onto the average American. And at first, Americans bought it. Again, from Virginia Durr. People blame themselves, not the system. They felt that they had been at fault. If we hadn't bought that old radio, if we hadn't bought that old secondhand car. Among the things that horrified me were the preachers and fundamentalists. They would tell people they suffered because of their sins. And people believed it. God was punishing them. Their children were starving because of their sins. People who were independent, who thought they were the masters and mistresses of their lives, were all of a sudden dependent on others. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Lamentz, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet.
It is the history of America to blame the individual rather than the system. However, throwing our hands up and claiming no responsibility for our own actions isn't healthy either. In fact, having a strong, eternal locus of control or belief that you have control over your decisions is fundamental to being successful. So which is it? Do we blame the system for squeezing us out of housing? Do we blame the system for making 70% of us fat? Do we blame a system that puts us all into medical debt? Or do we chastise those who haven't figured out how to pull harder on their bootstraps? That's our episode today, asking how much individual responsibility should we take? What's healthy versus how much should we blame the game for being rigged? To start us off, we have 3 myths that need busting. Myth 1, the whole world is getting fat. As we mentioned, 70% of us Americans are officially overweight now. Does that mean 70% of us were born with broken willpower? Myth 2, between student loans, housing loans, and medical bills, nearly all of us are burned by some form of debt. Are we all just really irresponsible? Should 95% of Americans just hang their heads in shame and live in the doghouse? Myth 3, if I'm addicted to sugar, it's cute, But if you're addicted to opioids, it's a personal problem. You need to work on your willpower. At least that's what the pill-pushing doctors wanted us to think in the 90s. Those who were getting paid by OxyContin manufacturers. So what about now? Have Americans turned the corner on addiction? We're going to get to our myths. But first, I want to share another quote from Turkle's book about the Great Depression.
When you watch documentaries about the Great Depression, like Going Through School, Ken Burns, things like that, I never got a sense that people blame themselves as much as they did. Like, I didn't read about that until I started reading Turkle. I always kind of got a sense of like, yeah, everybody kind of knew Wall Street was gambling. Yeah, everybody kind of took a little bit of personal responsibility because they didn't save enough money. It never struck me so hard that how much the president and the Fed blamed civilians and how much everybody just accepted that. I mean, everyone, which was madness.
Yeah, I didn't think that either. I thought that it was this Wall Street collapse, and it, to me, I think maybe what sensitizes to it a little bit was it's similar to the COVID thing, where there was a bout of people who were saying, well, your health is your responsibility too, right?
Right.
Everyone was in something, but is it your own fault that you're in this? Yeah, I think that kind of made it more personal.
Right. I think the bell we ring in America, and this is, we'll get into this obviously, but we probably take more personal responsibility than many other countries, where we are willing to accept that a system breaks. Like, obviously during COVID, it exposed so many broken systems. It exposed a inept medical system that was not providing enough beds, not just during an emergency, but just generally. There were many gaps in the medical system, many extremely corrupt insurance and billing systems. And yet, and this is just one tiny corner of COVID. We talked housing, we've talked, prisons, we've talked a lot of issues that happened, but just one tiny sliver was the medical, and yet a lot of the blame fell on the individual for not having a pillow of a cushion of money, a rainy day fund to pay for basically getting COVID, something that that at the time was more dangerous and way more costly.
Well, how many people have you hung around with who were actually in the Great Depression of those older people?
Two. One of them was the great grandmother of a friend of mine, and I ended up staying with them for a while. And my grandmother was young, like almost too young to remember the Depression, but her family's behavior affected hers.
Well, both of my grandparents, or both of my sets of grandparents, and my step grandparents were all in the Great Depression. And because I'm older than you, I'm a notch older than you, and I think that we would think the individualism, because these people were just such good savers. I mean, they really were, like, we all knew that they were so traumatized by how terrible things were that they put money and savings above all other things. So we knew that it was such a traumatic thing because it just affected and changes so many people's core value system.
Right. But the funny part is, I remember my friend's great grandmother talked about how the strangest thing to her was, she said during the Depression, they gave poor people, because she was on the East Coast, were eating lobster because they could catch it, and rich people could still afford peanut butter. And she didn't talk about personal responsibility. She just kind of spoke as if everybody understood that the system had broken, but that it was every man for themselves, that everybody, like the personal responsibility in hindsight from even older folks is, everybody is responsible for making their own shack and getting their own food and going out and standing in line to try to get a job at the docks. Like, everybody is in their own sort of like in their own survival mode. But I hardly ever heard anybody talk about the brokenness of the system beyond, yeah, Wall Street screwed up. Like, that's pretty much the summary of it.
Well, this Virginia Dursbury, from studying for this episode, she's a great writer, isn't she?
Absolutely.
Well, let me read these two quotes because it's on what you just said. This is Virginia Dursbury's words. The Depression affected people in two different ways. The great majority reacted by thinking money is the most important thing in the world, Get yours and get yours for the children. Nothing else matters. And then the second part of that is she says, and then there was a small number of people who felt that the whole system was lousy. You have to change it. The kids come along and they want to change it too, but they didn't know what to put in its place. So they weren't really sure what to do. And so it's exactly what you're just saying. There's this two totally.
That quote makes me think of like there are basically my age and older people who are absolutely shocked at how much socialist lean there happens to be in the younger generations. I think Virginia Durr's quote there, I mean, like she says that the kids come along and they want to change it, but they don't seem to know what to put in its place. That struck me. Like reading that, I was like, oh my God, this is an old thing. This is back to the Depression. This is the system absolutely proves that it doesn't work right now and it's not favoring its citizens. And so everybody is like, what do we put in its place? And especially younger people. And older people are like Virginia Durr's, her convent or her flock or the people she's going to church with. Everybody else who's older is like, well, you should have done better yourself. Like you should have saved more. You should have had more equity. You should have invested or whatever.
Well, this next picture you talked about reminded me of North Korea. I've done some studying, and my ex-wife was from South Korea, but I learned a lot about Korea history. And North Korea, there's a lot of people starving to death, but they're literally starving to death working on farms that are plush, some of the best soil and irrigation in the world or whatever, because it's just so poorly managed. And that Virginia Deer talks about that a lot of times in the South, there'd be African Americans would help at the white households do slaughtering and stuff. And they would get like the leftover stuff that the white people didn't want to eat. And then they were just letting crops rot because even though people were starving and people were hungry, the system was just broken. These people should be able to farm their stuff and sell them. I mean, it just seems it is idiotic. It seems very, very stupid.
Yeah. By the way, this episode comes from a long sort of like series of studies we kind of did for the book and for independent stuff. And I was my poor fiance. She was like, "What are you reading?" And I was like, "It's about the land prices of farms just before the agriculture revolt in the 20s." Or the agriculture, the forming of the unions, and like she's just like her eyes are glazing over, and she's like, "What if?" Like I thought you were full of interesting facts. I saved all those for the first couple of dates we went on. Every other talk we've had since has been me being like, "Isn't this so fascinating that farms were overproducing because they were used to wartime production?" And yeah, so to kind of bring things back, farms weren't able to sell, or they were getting nothing for basically their labor. All of their farms had been overpriced, and everybody was forced to buy at overpriced rates because of the war. And it's because people were they're like, oh, this plot of land is worth so much more because you're going to be able to sell that crop to Europe. And meanwhile, Europe is kicking ass at their recovery efforts. And also, if we want to point a finger at what went wrong with the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover did not believe in handouts. He was very much into it is personal responsibility. He called it rugged individualism. And he said that it's the consumer that should make the recovery effort for the country. I've got a quote here, if you don't mind me reading it, from Hoover.
Please.
He said, economic depression cannot be cured by legislative action or executive pronouncement. He said, economic wounds must be healed by the action of the cells of the body, the producers and the consumers themselves. And
that's always funny from a president. Anyone from the higher social class who's never ever really worked except for the
right,
who's born into money thinks these people just need to get off their ass.
Right. Basically, he said what we heard during COVID, which is you should have prepared more, you should have saved more, go out and get a job. Yeah.
I remember when the president's daughter said, why don't these people, instead if they lost their jobs, why don't they just start a business?
Right.
In a very, and that is sincere, genuine way. Like, why not? They just don't want to do something different. Like we all have money to.
Right. And we even talked about during an episode, we did an episode long ago about analysis paralysis and millennials and younger folks, and we found out that more than half at the time younger folks had their own business. They had side gigs and they were selling stuff online and they were doing anything they could. So like that's her version of let them eat cake, very much.
Well, I think it's important. Virginia Durr, I'm a big fan of hers now, but she's talking about, she identified at the time of being a Southern snob, which I thought was very cute. And this is what she said about people at the time. People of pride went into shock and went into sanitariums, which is, the loony bin. She said, my mother was one. She said, people who were independent and thought they were masters and mistresses of their life, they were all of a sudden, these were, leaders in their community and successful people. They had to go stay with relatives and they just went into shock. And she said her mother was one of them. This is someone that she looked up to, was strong, was independent, who could, was a winner, but they just couldn't handle that kind of rejection and that kind of failure.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Don't you see that today? When you see that half of all people becoming homeless right now are boomer generation who had their finances squared away, that they had a house, they had a savings, they had everything, and because of inflation and because of unfair housing and because of just market changes that we have no regulation on, what you see is people of pride basically quietly going into homelessness or
Yeah.
into psychiatric facilities, or you see these people who are like, I feel, I don't know, a lot of this resonates with me. Like as much as we have reported on and talked about the current economy and all of these unregulated fields of the economy that are suffering greatly, this piece just it echoed so hard.
Well, I went through this myself in 2008, and I lost a couple houses. An unregulated mortgage business really affected a lot of people's lives, and people who thought they were brilliant real estate investors and were thousandaires or millionaires on paper, when they lost everything and they lost their house and they lost their sense of pride, everyone kind of usually took a step back in their career. Either they were doing the same thing for a lot less money, or they had to change industries and start over. Everyone got humbled, because it happened so fast. You went from being a big shot and a rich person to starting over. And it was kind of, we're all in the same boat. And I think that was a system thing too, right? It wasn't regulated.
Well, that actually came from the same string of regulation. I mean, like, okay, so we'll get into what exactly caused the Great Depression, why it was a systemic failure, not a people failure. There are still people. I mean, I swear to God, I have heard historian like teachers claim that it was everybody came together and made poor choices in the market system problem, whereas the actual Federal Reserve itself admits that it was a problem with the government, a problem with regulation, and a problem with how people were dealing with the market and how farms were overproducing and things like that. The quote came from Ben Bernanke, who was the 14th chairman of the Federal Reserve. And he actually said, yes, it was our fault, meaning the Fed, not himself. He wasn't around back then. But he said, and thank God for the Federal Reserve because we have better policies and better tools and we can do better this time. And so it's like he's reading that and being like, okay, even the authorities of today admit that it was a systemic failure. Yet there are people who still don't want to get rid of the idea that you can't put everything on personal responsibility, that it's not always the people who are responsible for a system failure. And that hurts me too. I think that you and I, Todd, because you and I are both very, very driven and very personally motivated. The idea that something is out of our control or that we can't prepare for it or even have a rainy day for it, like there are things that hit you so hard from the system that somebody designed something so predatory that you can't overcome it personally.
And I think we'd spend a lot of our energy blaming ourselves and feeling bad and thinking, well, if I wouldn't have done this and if I would have done this and not done this, I know how you, right? We'll put
Oh,
ourselves in our place. Yeah,
uh,
when we're really fighting a losing battle. I think working with you and learning more about social class, I realize how much I didn't know and how many cards I had at the poker table or how many chips I had at the poker table compared to other people. And I'm thinking, well, I'm doing okay considering.
oh, 1,000%. When we started this podcast, I only wanted to talk about like self-improvement and what will make us better people. Doing the research for this podcast, even answering simple questions like should we take personal responsibility and how much should we take and what's healthy? That's what we're answering today. By the way, I'm sorry we're 20 minutes in and we've only just gotten to what question we're answering today. It's, in spite of, the world crumbling, the sky falling and people freaking out, how much personal responsibility should you take day to day that is a healthy amount and an amount that will empower you the most and make you the best survivor and the best provider.
And I do
um,
believe on the survival part, Joe, I want to add to that is that we only learn when we lose. I mean, when you win, you really don't learn anything. You
yeah
just feel entitled and you kind of take a step, you just take a deep breath and enjoy it. But and party, right? Is what Tony Robbins says. But when you lose and when something happens like this across the board, where it's a good measuring tool, right? When the economy's down, there's a depression, a recession, or COVID, then you get a chance to really, take a deep breath and analyze what mistakes have been made.
yeah well, it is like our analogy earlier. It's looking out at the highway, seeing 1 in 3 cars explode, and then telling yourself like, well, they're just bad drivers, like it's not a manufacturing issue. um so we
Some of this got to be kind of common sense, right?
yeah. So we need to set up some ground rules for this. Like I was going to say that I started this podcast wanting to be pro person, to be pro personal choice, personal responsibility, pro like anything that put power into our hands. That's what I wanted from the start of doing this podcast. And after a couple of years, I have become anti-corporate to such a strange degree. And this is going to come out in this episode, especially that like as we go through this, we're just going to go after through issue by issue that is caused by corporate or overreach and lobbying and like people who just really want the most money possible, and how it tests our personal responsibility. Because the answer that they always give is, well, people should be more responsible while they do things that are just straight up dangerous to the public.
Let me tell people about Joe. Joe was a corporate man for the same company for 15 fucking years. And he was a professional writer at night. So he he was a good corporate guy for a long time, right?
I very much was. I was in
The
it. Yeah.
company sold hands like 7 times and he was still there. He was like godfathered into some
I actually, this is going to sound weird. I got a retirement gift because I'm young. Like I'm not retirement age. They had passed me through the company changing hands so many times. They gave me a retirement gift while I was still working there. I wasn't leaving.
They assumed he was 90 because he'd been there so long.
That retirement gift, by the way, was a fancy speaker. I took that over the watch and a couple other choices they gave me. But
High threshold for pain is what I say.
they didn't notice that I was in I literally blended in with the wallpaper because I wore wallpaper uniforms and I just sat there in the back writing. Well, we want to lay down some ground rules for this discussion, because if we're going to separate between what actually falls under our personal responsibility and gives us the best health and the best mental attitude versus when lobbyists or marketers try to tell us it's our personal responsibility, now pay up, we want to separate those two. We want to grab sand with our hands and pull out the actual gems of this is our responsibility. So to start with, we're going to talk about what is actually under our control. To do that, we have, unfortunately, he passed recently. I didn't know Danny Kahneman passed until I heard a Freakonomics episode. He's a Nobel Prize winner who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. And he's honestly going to be remembered as our generation Sigmund Freud, except for Kahneman is probably right about most of the stuff, whereas Freud is just creepy sometimes. But he changed the way we think about smart decisions and taking personal responsibility. He introduced into the corporate world the idea of nudging consumers and nudging people into good choices instead of making big drastic choices. We've talked about it on the show. Um, he also here's a really good quote from him that I think basically sets the stage for everything we're talking about today. Kahneman said in his book, quote, "People are more likely to make a decision that aligns with the default option, which can be used to steer choices toward healthier or more beneficial outcomes. When the default is set to more beneficial outcomes, people are more likely to stick with it because opting out requires additional effort." Good examples of this are if you have an enrollment form for people to get into their pension plan or a 401k or sign up for a retirement savings, you want people to opt into that. It is healthy for them, but it's also tempting for them to not want to do it just so they can take more money home at the end of their paycheck. So if you make the default option the pension plan, and that they have to go to the effort of checking a box and signing it, you have to fill something out to opt out. They're more likely to do the healthy thing. Same thing with healthy choices at the cafeteria. If you're in college or you're at the hospital or you're in elementary school, if the default choice is the vegetables and the spring roll and fruit and a lean chicken, if the default option is good stuff, you will eat the good stuff. Almost without exception, unless you're having a cheat day or you want to go to the effort of something snacky or ice cream. If you have to fill out an order form and send it back with the chef so that you can get the unhealthy option, 9 times out of 10 you'll take the healthy. Economists, like we said, call it nudging. And as soon as
That's
Kahneman,
encouraging though, right?
oh, it's a
That's
great
that's
thing.
that's
Yeah,
against that. We're just poor willpower, and we push the easy button every time. If it's 50-50, we're going to do the right thing, even if it's
right.
a little bit more trouble, right?
And that's how we should take that. We shouldn't look at Kahneman's research and say, what poor lazy fools we are that we only take the default. What this should tell you is that you can structure your life to reinforce your willpower. That if you make your defaults or your quote unquote nudges healthy things, you're more likely to do a lot more healthy things in your life. You will live longer, literally. And that's a fantastic thing. We should structure everything to be that way. We should have not take away options, never deprive somebody of a choice. I'm very I believe in social choices and individual responsibility. What we should do though is to not make the default a terrible thing, and that's actually what companies do. And I I am not a hippie enough to say evil corporations. I don't think any corporation is inherently evil. I think that the choices they make to push their products can be evil. For instance, Philip Morris, the company that brought you Marlboro cigarettes and Miller beer and basically just all addictive things, um, they began making high fat, high sodium addictive snack foods because cigarettes stopped being popular. It used to be that everybody would go out for a smoke break at 10, but less and less people smoke. Like it's kids will take up vaping before they take up smoking. Like cigarettes just aren't a thing anymore. You don't even. I don't think can they show people smoking on TV anymore? Was that banned?
Well, in movies it's okay, but I think you probably were right. I'm laughing. I'm thinking these people are like should be this company. Philip Morris is like a serial killers, right?
Right.
They're like, but they don't have. They like to kill them any way they can, right?
Well, they found they're like, speaking of selling addiction, they found a way to basically take crackers and meat and cheese and process it in a way where it is the most delicious it can be for the smallest amount of food. So like if you've ever opened up a Lunchables snack box, Lunchables are only about 3 to 4 ounces of food. It's a very, very small amount of food, and yet it contains about half of your sodium for the day.
That sounds like the same formula for making methamphetamines. Let's make something cheaper and smaller and worse for you. I mean,
Right.
and cheap, yeah, at least expend and available for children.
Right. Although that's where it's exactly marketed at, is it's marketed toward children, and it's supposed to look like a default choice. Like it's when it's in the market, it is made to be as easy to buy as possible. It comes in a prepackaged, ready to go into a lunch sack. Like it is built to be extremely default. Um, and after 20 years of very expensive, very intense lobbying and paying off politicians, Kraft Lunchables finally got their snack foods put into school lunch programs as a default. So you're welcome, children. um, and this is having a lot of pushback. Actually, Todd, do you have the full story of this?
Yeah. The Consumer Reports, and as an advocacy group, they're trying to get Lunchables out of the reduced price lunch program. And they're just saying that, they have the nutritional levels for kids. Kids, when you remember you're a kid in school and they talk about that you need to have fruits and vegetables and bread,
The food pyramid, yeah.
exactly. And they're just showing that they have okay, I'll read this to you. The turkey and cheese variety in schools has 930 milligrams of sodium. Okay. And that's higher than the 740 found in the commercial available
Did you say 900?
Yeah, 930. I mean, it's just top ramen off the charts.
That's more than a burger from Burger King. I know
Yeah.
that off the top of my head because I have high blood pressure.
Yeah, our blood pressure goes up just thinking about this. But that's almost 200 milligrams higher than the ones that they already make. And then for the schools, for their pizza, they have the little pizzas. That's 700 milligrams of sodium, while the option that's sold in their stores is only 500. So they're saying they need to get this out. But the company is saying we're proud. This is a quote from their company. We are proud of Lunchables and stand by the quality and integrity that goes into making them. Even put in their face with this evidence that you're making a less healthy thing, high sodium, and we know how you can get that kind of addicted to sodium, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I drive by pho places and I want to pull in just because I love that sodium. It's just, or lick the salt off margaritas. You know what I mean? I love it. And so they're getting kids to get addicted to this.
I think that for me, the adult version is the summer sausage at Christmas and the cheese cubes and all that stuff. It's crazy that they're able to take something that is literally too rich to be served outside of like cocktail parties and Christmas, and they're like, no, this is going to be lunch every single day, and we will pass this over the counter at a school. That's the. Have you seen the pictures of it? Like the pictures of kids loading up their food trays with Lunchables instead of real food, like 3 ounces
Right.
of crackers in a little plastic box instead of 10 to 12 ounces of broccoli, mashed potatoes, burgers. Like they're taking so much less food, and it's so much worse for them.
Well, you talk about the difference in our book about the Lehman Brothers and Dick Fooled, right?
Yeah.
This is similar to that. So in our book, we talk about how the Lehman Brothers were paying lobbyists millions of dollars right before they crashed the economy. And this is a throw in your face. So when you read this statistic, if you're a parent or a teacher or a school administrator or a superintendent, this is a no duh, right?
Yeah.
Why do we have a less healthy option than that's already unhealthy in stores? Well, there's a reason, and it's that Kraft Philip Morris has paid so much from March 2007 to present. They've paid just shy of $27 million. And now who they're paying that to is even scary. It's the Food and Drug Administration. We'll put in our notes all the different Homeland Security, Environmental Protection Agency, the Treasury Department of Corruption for Community Services, Centers for Disease Control. It goes on and on. So they're covering all their bases.
That's
so you
fucking
think,
madness.
Yeah, that should be against the law. That should be right.
Well, let's just take a short little uh, a short little break there to talk about that for a second and how that's even legal. It is totally legal to take money and put it into a politician's campaign. So if they were like putting money into a senator's campaign that they like, and they're pumping money into a campaign that there's corporate personhood and super PACs, and like we're allowed to do that. I strongly disagree with that in general. I'm a weirdo who believes in point system voting. Like I don't even think we should have two parties. I think we should have many parties and many people who like we should vote based on policy. Instead, you mentioned Lehman Brothers, and the reason we talk about them is they were caught red-handed, literally causing the financial crash, and they were paying like a 30th of this. They were paying a fraction of this to get away with that. This is Kraft, a snack company, why the fuck are they paying into the USDA and the FDA and Homeland Security? And like, these people aren't running for offices. This isn't like paying into, the DeSantis campaign. This is paying into a the campaigns of people who are running in regulatory systems. That's the scary part, and it's that much money. It's
Well, and the
I,
scary part
I'm
too is,
losing my mind here. Help me out.
and how do you, if you're the insurance companies with health insurance companies, do you see how this turns out? The obesity rate in this country is somewhere around, for child obesity rate is somewhere around 16, 17%. And then as the kids get older, it goes higher, in Oregon and in some states like Alabama, it's as much as, middle school kids are 30, in the 33, 35% obesity rate. And then when they get into high school, then you get into the Starbucks and the white chocolate mochas. You can see that this is going to, not to catastrophize it, but all these people are going to be sick and unhealthy younger than they
Right.
have been in history, right? And there's more people than in history. So you think that this has to kind of stop before it gets out of control. And you've seen that when I was a kid, like you said, cigarette smoking was a thing. Stay away from cigarette smokes. Now sugar and calories is the enemy. It's the most addictive thing, and it's ruining the health of our country.
Right. We used to tell kids don't do drugs. Like we had the Dare program, which was proven to be ineffective. But we have simpler things. We used to tell kids stay away from smoking. Like don't smoke like your parents do. But even that was something where the kid would have to go out and pay an adult to go pose, like to buy them cigarettes, or they'd have to steal cigarettes, or they'd have to get it in some way where it wasn't being sold to them, and they'd have to go out of their way. I mean, like we talk about nudges and making the default a healthy option, and Kahneman's research, and everybody adopting that, and then you have companies like Kraft where it's like we're going to make the default something awful. um, can we tell kids, make healthier choices? Can we look to the 15% of obese kids and 40 something or 50 something percent of fat or overweight kids? Can we look to them and say, you did this to yourself, you made unhealthy choices? And then they start crying and they're like, but I bought it at lunch. Like it was the default, it was literally on the menu for healthy choices. Can we still tell them, no, that's on you, you made poor choices, you need to take personal responsibility, elementary schooler?
Little Jimmy.
Yeah. um I want to turn this into a bit of a not a game show, but like I want to play kind of like a game, which is who's to blame, because we have. I truly do believe in personal responsibility. We're going to save that for a little bit later. And we're going to talk about how absolutely powerful having a strong internal locus of control is, because honestly, it could make your life. It can give you what Angela Duckworth called grit. Having an internal locus of control makes you a more powerful decider. It makes you more focused. It basically, all the good benefits of life come from having the thought that you have the ability to change or move your own life. That's the root of Stoicism, comes from this sort of like element of psychology that we're talking about.
Well, that's what I've taught.
However, yeah,
You need to handle your stuff, and it helps. It served me well, right? That no one's going to help me. I'm going to have to do this myself. Well, people will help you. You got to go ask for them. That's of course a myth too, but and you're going to need help. But go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
I somebody I remember. I think it was a personal trainer at the gym told me, be your own hero. And I was like, that is the strongest thing anyone's ever said to me.
This is why you don't go to the gym, because
I know.
I can see you rolling your eyes like, oh shit.
I liked hearing that. I mean, I went out and ate Lunchables afterward, but at the time I liked it. Okay, so let's go through the classics. Like we have a slate of things that we have accepted are under the umbrella of personal control, personal responsibility. We have modern Herbert Hoovers who will say, oh, X amount of people are fat, or X amount of people have student loans, or X amount of people have these problems. They should have taken responsibility. And the rest of us, we're good. Like, no, you small percentage of people with problems, you really ought to get your shit together. The rest of us are okay. So let's go through these issues, and we're going to just go through a speed round of myth busting on how much is personal responsibility and how much isn't. And I honestly want our opinions on this too, because um, you and I usually, when we read the science or the research, we don't often fight against it. But I want to fight against some of these. Like some of these, I still think that personal responsibility is the answer. I just know it's going to be way harder if you have a company spending $30 million to try to get a bad thing into your hands. So let's start with the one we've been talking about, obesity. Um, the myth I've heard, and tell me if you've heard this similarly, is that in the 1930s everyone was skinny because everyone had self control and everybody worked on farms or factories, and we burned off all the calories, whereas everyone today just sits behind a computer and eats donuts.
I've heard that 100%, except for the self-control thing. I've heard that we weren't, well, forget about even computers. There's TV, right? TV had 3 channels.
Yeah.
You had to go out and do stuff. Even, you had to go look for things to do because there just wasn't any home entertainment. Not near the level now.
I come from a family that came from Southern farmers. So they used to tell me it's literally because we stopped working on farms as Americans. Like that everyone, they literally said this. They're like, everyone used to work on farms. Everyone stopped doing physical activity, and now we're all getting fat and we're dying. And they're like, that is 100% on people.
It did seem like kids did work more, right? Everyone had a job, paper
Right.
route, everyone did something. And the rich, unless you were the mega rich, but most of even the rich kids, their parents were adamant that they need to do something.
Right. Well, I actually went digging for numbers. I'm not trying to bust this because I hate the myth, or even I'm not even admit that it is a myth, because I still think that people were more active, and I still think that people were they didn't have TVs and computers. Like they did have to walk more. Um, but I pulled up some numbers and I found out that only 1/5 of Americans lived on farms in the 1930s. Um, Approximately 30% worked in manufacturing, but not all manufacturing jobs were heavy labor. A lot of them were sort of just like processing jobs. The rest worked normal jobs like the rest of us. They worked in cleaning and service industry and clerical work. Roughly the same types of jobs existed, just not as many computer jobs.
So people are still working at Dairy Queen, but instead of typing in the order, they're writing it on a piece of paper, right? It's the same thing.
Right, exactly. And the difference in obesity and overweightness, in the 1930s, it was 0 to 14% among. Oh no, sorry, it was 0% among boys. Among young girls, it was 2%. So the obesity rates were either from 0 to 2, roughly, depending on gender. And then it rose to 1993 up to 14% among boys and 12% among girls. So the reason I picked out the 90s, we had TV in the 50s and 60s. Like TV started exploding, but that still doesn't really account for how many of us started getting
But
obese.
5%, the farm thing is blown out of the water.
Yeah, the 1/5 of
Yeah,
Americans lived on
it
farms. It's
wasn't the
like
John
that's
Cougar
not enough.
Mellencamp.
No,
We're all bucking bales of hay after school. No, that was not a thing. We're all hauling in the crops. No,
I really honestly thought it was going to be like 90% of Americans were on farms.
you did have a troubled
Um,
childhood. And why is everyone in your family so strong opinion? Hard heads in that family of yours.
Irish Catholic. I blame that. That is why. Um, I will link to the study we're going to be copying. I have now started, because there is so much sort of distrust among scientific community, and there's so many bad studies have come out. We did last week's episode about bad science, at least in part. There has been so much study and so much research into obesity and the reason Americans have gotten obese. The It's not like we're not trying to solve this. When you ever hear studies about like, oh, what's the root of happiness or something, you might run into like 5 or 6 good studies. Obesity is something we have been trying to fix since it started happening. Like we have been doing studies on this even before bunk science, and everything we've really ever uncovered has pointed to Kahneman's answer. It's Danny Kahneman. It's the idea that if the default is bad food, you're going to have the default. We invented addictive foods, and we put it on literally every corner. And guess what? People make it their default when they're busy, or when they want a treat, or when they're not thinking too hard, and obesity shoots up. Um, so that seems to be one of the biggest myths about personal responsibility, and that's the one we hold up as like the golden. This is the icon of personal responsibility in the American economy. Is we say that if there's one thing you can control for yourself, it is how fat you get. Um, Whereas now the CDC has agreed for the last 10 years that obesity is an incurable disease, or at least an incurable state, and it's because the defaults around you are so bad.
Am I allowed to say something with no research, just something that I heard from my Airbnb guest over
Absolutely.
and over? Well, I used to have a lot of European Airbnb guests, and every single one of them told me that in America, healthy food is cheap, healthy food is expensive, and garbage food is cheap and easy to get. And overseas, it's the opposite. That fresher food is just, it costs less too. It's comparable, or it's easier to get than the
Right.
availability we have here, which I would think would, availability and the use of anything good or bad is a big, like you said, the choice, right? If we're given the same choice for the same money, we'd pick the healthier one every time.
It's completely true. Um, it comes back to like, what do we make the default? There are many countries that have put regulation on the frequency, or how many fast food places uh, can set up shop on every corner. There are countries that have regulated not just what's in the food. Like that's the thing, is we like to think that this is an affront to the free market. That if somebody says you can't have a McDonald's literally on every corner, that is a slap in the face of Uncle Sam. You are kicking Uncle Sam in the groin if you say that you can't have a Burger King followed by McDonald's followed by Taco Bell on every single corner. Um, but it is nudging our society toward being overweight, to the tune of 70% of us are overweight. And now we are putting those equally bad foods in schools as the default at the youngest age possible. I mean, literally, the only thing they could do now is go back and start putting craft Lunchables and burgers in hospitals, so that neonatal wards have to use them instead of milk. Like we have now gotten them so young, and we're like, why are 70% of us overweight? It's like, well, if every car on the road sets on fire, you don't think everyone's a bad driver simultaneously.
Well, yeah, and
Um,
that's the bread that we eat. Let's say go to a nice bakery, and you get, you walk in, that sugar smell hits you, that endorphins that feels. Well, bread in this country would be categorized as candy in Europe. And
the
it's
level
that
of sugar that
sweet,
they put
right?
into it.
It is that
Yeah.
sweet, right? When you eat bread, it is. But we're so used to it, we don't know the difference. We don't know bread's supposed to taste like bread. We don't know the difference.
I had a weird experience where I bit into a Papa John's pizza once, which I'd never had, and the sauce tasted sweet. And I had to look it up to confirm that I wasn't just absolutely losing my mind. And I was like, oh, they add sugar to the sauce. They add sugar
Crazy.
to pizza sauce.
Isn't that terrible? You know?
Yeah. I up until recently, it felt like I remember watching I think Louis C.K. made a joke about this once, where it's like, beating up on fat people was the last group you could make jokes about, because it was still seen as personal responsibility. It was still seen as they had done this to themselves. The answer was simple: all they had to do was eat less, or have less calories going into their body than the amount of calories that they burn. But people don't walk around with a math equation in their head. They're not counting, or they're not calculating every single second of the day. And it would probably be mentally unhealthy to do that. It's just the idea that we are still willing to shift the blame to personal responsibility, when not just more than half, when the majority of us now have this problem. Like, at what point are we willing to say that maybe it's craft foods invading lunches for kids, and maybe it's a marketing system that is entirely built to be predatory toward us? When do we admit that that might be the problem versus you really should just watch your calories, like personal responsibility? Um, Now, I do believe that internal locus of control is the only answer to fix this. But I want to ask Todd, because you've done this. Like you and I have both lost weight at times of our life. We have both not just gone on diets, but changed the structure of our life to get healthier. What would you say was the catalyst for it? Like, does it seem like we're overblowing things as far as the world being set up to nudge you into making bad choices? And how do you stop yourself from doing that?
Well, with us, I'll speak for you too. I think we had, our health problems. Our blood pressure and our weight got out of hand to we couldn't do the things that we wanted to do anymore. I think both of us was less about vanity and more about fear. So I think if we would have kept going, like our hearts were literally pounding out of our chest.
Right.
And so we had to get better. The first one was when I got divorced and I thought I'd have to attract another mate. And I was 50 pounds overweight. And I looked around and I would call it peer pressure. I saw the other guys my age who were single and they were 50 pounds thinner than me. So I'd say a combination of those two things, of vanity and it wasn't easy. It's a lot harder to set up all that, to set up that structure in your life. To set up it's way easier to make bad habits than good habits.
Yeah.
What would you say?
For me, it was fear of dying. I had crazy high blood pressure and I was very overweight. I still am overweight, but at the time I had to lose like 100 pounds or die. And I found out that every single restaurant you go to is built to maximize how much tastiness they give you so that you'll keep coming back and paying them. Um, I mean, just to give you for instance, I now am living in a town that has a population of about 6,000, 7,000. And along the highway, they have 21 different restaurants and shops and venues that you can order food at. I can only eat at about 3 of them. And that's not because I'm being precious or I have allergies. It's simply those are the ones where it has a normalized level of sodium, sugar, and fat in it. And when I say normalized, like a home cooked meal, like it has a average amount from an average meal that you would make from average groceries from the store. The rest of them have a hyperized what they put in it to make it as high calorie and high sodium and high sugar as possible.
That's
Um,
not fun though. It isn't fun to be to turn ourselves into the diabetic, gluten free. We can't go there because of Joe. I'll just have a water,
no, that happens.
I mean, isn't that
with
tough socially?
with with my fiance's extended family, I'll be like, I can only eat at these 3 places, and they'll be like, "Are you gluten free? What are you? Is your cholesterol? What's wrong?" And I'll just be like, "No, I have high blood pressure, and I have to eat like a normal person." And normal people don't eat like normal people. Normal people eat what they're marketed to eat. So
I like the precious princess. I like that. Not prince,
yeah,
but precious prince that you are.
I honestly should just own it. Like I should just say, I should pretend like I am a hipster, just have a scarf around my neck, and be puffing on like a fake pipe, and just be like, I am gluten free, I am vegan. I just like list all these things that is it's impossible to serve in a restaurant. I don't have a peanut allergy. I have a sensitivity.
Yeah, it's how you say it. You gotta be
Yeah,
real pretentious.
exactly. Um, By the way, we are going in order of the most blame we can shift to an individual to the least. I will say that. By the way, let's rank this. Like I know we've already answered it, but for obesity and overweightness, I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 10 as far as like your ability to harness your internal locus of control and change it versus you have to live in society and eat like a normal person and be as busy as everybody else is. Um, so I'm saying you have a 3 out of 10 as far as how much control you can exert over the food, not the food that you eat. You have complete control over that. You have a 3 out of 10 of being able to maintain not being nudged toward bad food.
So I failed miserably. 3 out of 10. Is that what you got? Is that what you're saying? How did you do?
That's what I was. No, that's what I'm saying. Is I'm giving it a rating.
Okay.
Um,
How dare you?
well, how easy? If you gave it a 3 out of 10, how easy is it for you to keep your composure and not get nudged into bad decisions?
It's not easy. It's a full-time job. I try not to be. It's harder than it is. It's definitely less expensive, and then that gets into it too. It's definitely. Wouldn't you say it's more expensive to be healthier?
Much, much more. Yes.
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass. It's time consuming. It's something you have to think about all the time. It has to be a major focus.
Yeah, just the difference between not buying a pre-prepared hamburger patty at the store versus making your own burgers out of meat. Just that alone, honestly, like that, it's more expensive to buy fresh. It's more expensive to prepare it for yourself. It's time consuming, and then you end up saving yourself a factor of 5 times the amount of sodium by doing that, or whatever they're putting into it.
Do you think that overall in your lifetime, and you're younger than me, again, you're a tick younger than me, do you think that people are just eating more, period? Now, you're living in Texas now, which is a comfort food state if there ever was, and you lived in Oregon before, which is probably not quite as much. But do you think people are just overall, that the healthy thing is you don't have to eat every time you're hungry? But do you feel like as a culture, as a country, as a community, that is not the case anymore?
From what I could tell by going through these studies that we're linking to everybody, it really felt to me that we don't seem to be eating more volume than before. There is a book called The Fate of Empires, which talks about like the ebb and flow of like you have an empire spring up, it lasts for about 200 years, it starts to decline, it breaks up, it becomes smaller component countries, those countries eventually come together, they become empires eventually. It's a neat book. They talk about weirdly that there's a period during the decline of an empire where everybody becomes obsessed with food and with celebrity chefs, and this is back to like ancient Greece and ancient Rome.
Which those a lot of those shows on TV right now. That one kind of scares me a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that we maybe have more fixation on things that will distract us because we need to not think about the economy and how badly we're doing. I think that because of that, we focus on what we want to eat and foods and celebrity chefs and decadence and how delicious things are. But part of that too is that we have food engineers. We have people whose only job it is now. This is the first time in history where we have jobs where you just make the texture of a potato chip cracking be as delightful as possible in the mouth, or that we have somebody balancing the amount of sodium and pepper to make meat more or less bouncy. That's a test they've done. They used to fire meat at walls in ball form, and if it was more salted, it would bounce more. So it would be like a patty that can retain its shape. We have things like that now. So I think that we pay so much more attention to food. I don't think we eat more volume. Like I think we eat about the same size of meals or the same sort of like collections of food that we used to. I just think it's so much denser in calorie and denser in other things that are bad for us that it's almost as if we sat down and ate 3 meals for every one meal we eat.
I know exactly what you mean. I used to volunteer at a food bank for about 6 years in Seattle, and some of the kids would make me hold the cakes, like even these small cakes, and they weighed as much as 30-pound dumbbells. And you go, what the hell is in this? What kind of
Right.
cancerous, how dense can something be? That's a small, that's supposedly made out of flour and egg, You've been listening to The Reengineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, feedback, and blog articles for each of our episodes.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.
The intro song was provided by Off Moyum, I Was Different. Listen to them on freemusicarchive.org.